Good evening, my name's Lisa Townsend. I'm your Police and Crime Commissioner for Surrey, and I would like to welcome you to the first of our online Policing Your Community events, and this one this evening is for Surrey Heath. So one of my key responsibilities as your Police and Crime Commissioner is to represent your voice on policing, and I hope that tonight will be an opportunity for you to hear about the work that our policing teams are doing right across the county and specifically in Surrey Heath. So joining me here in the studio at Police HQ in Guildford, about Brown this evening, is Chief Constable Tim Meyer and your local Borough Commander, Inspector Gemma Taylor. So we carried out a series of in-person events through October, November and December, and across all 11 boroughs in Surrey. We were in Camberley in October, but we wanted to provide an opportunity for those of you who weren't able to join us in person to be able to ask questions and hear from the teams online, so thank you for joining us. You're going to be hearing from the three of us about the current priorities for the force, and there will be a chance to ask questions that you may have around policing, both across the county and specifically in Surrey Heath. We're going to do our very best to answer as many of these questions as we possibly can. If we don't get to your question, then we'll make sure that we get round to answering your question an email after the event over the coming week or so. So, as your Police and Crime Commissioner, it is my job to hold the Chief Constable and the force to account for the service that you receive. Tim Meyer is now around 8 months into his role here as Chief Constable, and it's a really important time for policing across our county. Thanks to the work that Surrey Police have done to recruit as part of the government's Uplift programme, we now have an extra, as part of the government's 20,000 extra officers, and thanks to your council tax contributions that you have been making over the years, Surrey Police has grown by 395 police officers. That means that Surrey Police Force is now the biggest it's ever been. It does mean that we have a much younger police force, and it is going to take time to get those recruits fully trained and properly out in all of our communities. As well as holding the Chief Constable and the force to account, I'm also responsible for setting the police and crime plan, and that helps to set the direction for the force. The key priorities within my police and crime plan are protecting people from harm, working with residents so that you feel safe, preventing violence against women and girls, ensuring safer Surrey roads, and strengthening the relationship between Surrey Police and its residents, which is part of what these meetings are all about. In the last year, as part of the commissioning function of my office, we've awarded over £5 million to local services, and that's included more funding than ever before in order to prevent violence against women and girls. My office has also been actively working with the force to improve the response that you get to antisocial behaviour and to, in particular, improve the response that you get when you call 101, which is our non-emergency number. Nationally, I take a lead on issues including transport safety and also the policing response to mental health. A key topic that is contributing to ensure that the police are able to respond to those who only the police can help. And our Chief Constable Tim Meyer has been taking a lead on this in Surrey, and I'm sure we'll talk about it later. Now, Surrey Police is an absolutely fantastic organisation, but the demand on our services is greater than it has ever been. And as Commissioner, I also oversee the Surrey Police budget and all of our assets, and that includes setting the amount of council tax that we all pay every year. I have to balance the cost pressures that we are all facing as organisations, as businesses and as homes, with my goal to provide the Chief Constable with the resources that he needs in order to maintain the service that you receive. It includes finding a further 17 to 20 £1 million in savings over the next 4 years, and that is not going to be simple at all. Now, times we know are tough, and asking the public for more money in your council tax is one of the most difficult tasks that I have as your Police and Crime Commissioner. The Chief Constable is going to talk to you shortly about his vision for the force and concentrating on what policing absolutely does best, which is fighting crime in our local communities and protecting people. And that's why you, the Surrey public, have told me that you want to see, it's what you want to see, and it's why I support the Chief Constable's vision for ensuring that the force is funded effectively. I believe that the Chief Constable's plan will significantly boost the service in all of our communities, and in order to achieve it, we have got to maintain appropriate funding for our police teams, which is why I must think very carefully about making sound and long-term financial decisions. If you haven't already done so, I would like to invite you to have your say in my council tax consultation that is currently live, and it is running until the 30th of January. You can find the link in the comments section of this meeting. It is on my office's website, you can find it there, and on our social media feeds. So please do take a few minutes, it takes less than 5 minutes to fill it out, and let me know what your views are. There are 5 options to consider. They are based on the government's funding settlement for policing this year, which gives PCCs the flexibility to increase the council tax precept, that's what you pay in your council tax bill towards policing, by £13 on an average Band D property. So that is just over an extra £1 a month, which equates to a rise of just over 4% across all of the council tax bands in Surrey. Our survey will ask you to consider whether you would support a £13 a year rise, £10, £11 or £12 a year, or a figure under £10. The Chief Constable has been very clear with me that with an increase of below £10 on an average Band D property, that would mean further savings by Surrey Police, including a cut to staff numbers. The force may have no choice but to reduce some of the services which the public values the most, such as taking calls, investigating crimes and detaining suspects. An increase of between £10 and £13 would mean that Surrey Police will be able to almost keep pace with inflation and keep any staff cuts to an absolute minimum. Whilst the maximum increase of £13 would provide the Chief Constable with most of the resources he needs to achieve his plans for the force, Surrey Police would still need to find at least £17 million of savings over the next 4 years. And it is important that we make every efficiency that we can. And that is why the force is undergoing a transformation programme at the moment, which is designed to ensure that we provide the very best value for money to you, the public. Your contributions through council tax make an enormous difference to the service that our hard-working officers and our staff are able to provide to you. For every £1 of precept set, Surrey Police is funded by an extra £500,000. Setting the precept is a task I don't take lightly. Last year, the majority of those who took part in our poll voted for a council tax increase to support our policing teams, and I want to know whether you would be willing to continue that support again in what is, I understand, an incredibly challenging time for all of us. You can scan the QR code on the screen now. It will take you straight to the survey. Please do take the 5 minutes that it takes to fill this in. I am going to hand over now to the Chief Constable so that he can talk through his plan, and you can hear why I believe that support for our policing teams is going to be so important over the next few years.
Thank you, Policing and Crime Commissioner. So I'm going to endeavour to condense the presentation that I've given to senior colleagues and also in person across our boroughs somewhat, and convey to you the key points of our plan, which I hope will realise our vision of earning the trust and confidence of the residents and businesses across Surrey and fighting crime and protecting people. And you would expect any organisation to have a vision as to what it wants to achieve overall, but pursuant to that vision, then to have particular missions and objectives on which it was keenly focused. And Surrey Police has 10 of these, and I'm going to speak to each of those in turn and hopefully give some examples of the sorts of activities we're going to focus on in particular. So Surrey Police, as I've said, aims to fight crime and protect people. You might think that's rather obvious, but I do think it's important that we restate our determination to deliver and achieve that which only the police can do. And we want to prevent crime and solve problems together with our partners. And Surrey Police has a well-earned and distinguished track record in preventing crime and solving problems. We've been praised over the years by our inspectorate and rightly won awards for our endeavours in this respect. But we now need to refocus this problem-solving capability on the problems which most seriously affect our communities now. And the first and most prominent of these is violence against women and girls. It might be the case that violence is more likely to be perpetrated against men or more likely to be committed by men. But the sort of violence which takes place against women is, in my respectful submission, different. Women are very often victims of violence in the course of their ordinary lives, simply because they went out for the evening, or they went to work, or they started a new relationship, or moved in with someone. And that to me creates a very strong moral obligation on our part to ensure that we do much better than policing and criminal justice has done in the past in tackling violence against women and girls. And that's why we're focused very keenly, for example, on domestic abuse. We're already seeing our rate of domestic abuse arrests increase substantially, and with that the rate of offenders who we charge for domestic abuse increasing too. I'm not suggesting that there aren't on occasion male victims of domestic abuse, but the great majority of victims who we see are women, and it behoves us therefore to do much better in this respect. We also need to work with our partners in the Crown Prosecution Service, really to improve the service we provide to women who are victims of rape and sexual offences, and increase the rate of charge and ultimately conviction of the most dangerous offenders, and reduce the rate at which women who seek our services then drop out before the case gets to trial. So I'm determined that we improve our response to violence against women and girls, and we've seen beyond investigation initiatives launched in Thames Valley Police. Forgive me, that was my old force, but it did come from Thames Valley Police. An initiative in Surrey Police which came from Thames Valley, which is Operation Shield, which sees a nighttime economy initiative where we focus not on potential victims, but on potential perpetrators who might have travelled to the area with no intention other than to target vulnerable people. So that summarises our determination to do better in respect to violence against women and girls. But those aren't the only problems we need to solve. We also need to focus very much on things like antisocial behaviour and shoplifting. In our in-person visits across the boroughs, we've heard people's concern about the need to ensure that the law is demonstrably upheld where we see lawlessness in public spaces. And that's why we'll be identifying the top hotspots for antisocial behaviour across Surrey, and ensuring that we identify those and are then held to account by the PCC and by association the public for making sure that we bring those under control. The Policing Minister has rightly set out the government wish that police need to do much more in respect of shoplifting, and we've seen operations in Surrey in the last month dedicated in particular to targeting shoplifting, and rates of arrest and charge increase significantly. We know that we rely on our local shops to keep communities going. They're important community hubs, that people who work in shops aren't especially well paid and have to work all hours of the day and evening, and it's only right that they get the police protection that they need. And it can't be right that people who go in and pay for their goods do so alongside people who are stealing with impunity. And I'm determined therefore that we crack down on shoplifting along with other crimes which particularly concern the community and harm community confidence. Therefore, we need to prevent crime and solve problems, but also to ensure that we are investigating crime thoroughly. And this may seem a rather obvious point because it's one of those things which only the police can do. But there is rightly concern about the quality of investigation and the rate of charging, not only in Surrey Police but across the UK. And Surrey Police certainly needs to improve in this area, and that's why we're investing in better training, better supervision, more detectives, and improved systems to ensure that we more swiftly and expeditiously and diligently investigate crime in order to bring offenders to justice. And that's particularly important, of course, in crimes such as burglary, whilst I'm pleased that burglary has fallen so substantially in recent years, due to a combination of factors ranging from the type of property which criminals want to acquire and dispose of, the tendency for people to work more often at home and the relative security of their homes, and other factors, we know that whilst burglary is low, it remains a crime which is of enormous concern and really affects the sense of security within communities and within families. And it's important, therefore, that we crack down on that. Surrey, some years ago, wasn't where it needed to be in respect of our performance in relation to burglary. Due to some strong leadership before I arrived, we saw Surrey Police's burglary performance improve dramatically, and I'm determined that we sustain those improvements. And we've seen Surrey across the South East region lead some really important high-profile operations to catch some very dangerous offenders who are operating across border and also internationally. And in pursuing criminals relentlessly, that doesn't simply mean swiftly making arrests in relation to things such as violent and sexual offences. It also means using the full extent of our powers to confiscate and seize criminal cash, and whether in respect of modern slavery, sexual exploitation or drug dealing, ensure that we are taking criminal money out of the system and really denying criminals the very thing which motivates them to get into crime in the first place. And that means taking on the county drugs lines who operate out of our major cities and would corrupt young people to deal drugs and make criminal money in places such as Surrey Heath. We need to provide outstanding victim and witness care. Many crimes now involve crimes between people who already know each other. In the past, it might have been the case that most of the crime we investigated involve people who didn't know each other. Burglary, street robbery, nighttime economy of violence, and so on. Now, very often the crimes we investigate involve crimes which happen within a relationship: domestic abuse, stalking, harassment, sexual offences. And therefore, we depend so much on the evidence of the victim, who might be our only witness, and therefore our care and support of that victim needs to be absolutely exemplary, which is why I'm determined that we provide outstanding victim and witness care. Moving on, it's in trying to earn the trust and confidence of our communities vital, of course, that the police act and are seen to act ethically and with the highest standards. I'm sure that you will be all too aware of the high-profile cases in other forces which have seen police officers committing the most egregious acts of crime and misconduct, which have damaged confidence in policing. And I'm absolutely determined that Surrey officers set the highest standards in respect not only of service but behaviour, and that means high standards of vetting and rooting out misconduct, whether it pertains to dishonesty or the abuse of officers' authority, which happen mercifully in a small minority of cases. But the Surrey public needs to be reassured of my determination to ensure that we root that out wherever we come across it. We want to reflect our communities, ensure that we are a police service where people really feel that they can belong. It's one thing to aspire to tolerance and inclusion, which is very much the language of diversity, but I want to go beyond that and ensure that this is a force where people feel that whoever they are and whatever their background, they can belong and fulfil their potential. Not only because we want to be representative of our communities, and not only because we want to ensure that we are operating in a way which accords with all of the principles of equality, but because we need the very best talent to become police officers, forensic scientists, PCSOs, and many more roles besides in policing, where we simply have to make sure that we are competing and attracting the very best ability, whatever the background of the person who could fulfil their potential within Surrey Police. So that really is something which is a priority. And we need to work productively and to spend public money wisely. I make it very clear to our officers, as I did to brand new recruits today on only their second day in Surrey Police, that the money which is entrusted to us was at one point earned by a private individual who might have retained that for themselves, spent it on their family, and instead it has gone into the state through local or central taxation. And it's incumbent on us to spend that money to the greatest possible public value. It could have gone on healthcare, defence or education. It's come to policing, and whether in respect to preventing crime or pursuing criminals, we have to spend that pound efficiently. We know, as the PCC has said, we are under some considerable pressure in respect of meeting our financial targets to ensure that we make the required savings without taking any money away from vital services which would diminish the service which we offer the public. So to that end, we need to make sure that we are operating efficiently. That means making the very best use of our systems, our processes and our people to ensure that we're extracting every last inefficient pound out of the system in order to ensure that we're dedicating every last penny we can to serving the public. And that means managing our contracts, our systems, our IT, and all that you can think of which would exemplify an efficient organisation. And finally, I'm determined that we're here for everyone who needs us, and that we put the service of others before any sense of self-interest. And being here for people who need us is writ most large in respect of the initial service we provide to people who phone us up or contact us via one of our digital services. We need to make sure that when people most need us and when things for them are at their worst, we are at our very best. That means answering the call promptly. It means responding swiftly. It means providing exemplary victim care, following up reasonable lines of inquiry, and quickly making arrests. And as the PCC has said, there has been concern in recent years about the extent to which police officers and police staff are abstracted from core policing duties instead to deal with people in mental health crises. It's not the right response for someone in mental health crises to be served by an officer with coercive powers who, however well-intentioned, won't be the best person to respond to that person's particular needs, however well-intentioned that might be. We understand, of course, the pressure which exists on other services whose raison d'etre might be to deal particularly with people in mental health crisis, and that's why we're working with colleagues in mental health and social services and the ambulance service and elsewhere to ensure that together we are coming up with measures which ensure that police officers are relieved of the responsibilities to respond to quite the extent that we do to people in mental health crisis, freeing us up to deal with domestic abuse, high visibility patrol, burglary prevention and so on, and making sure that people get the right care for their mental health needs. And I'm very encouraged by the progress which has been made in that respect and which is going to be coming over the coming months, which will both free up resources and also provide a better service. We need, of course, to be resilient and prepared, whether in relation to the need swiftly to respond to protest or public order, wherever that might be, whether that's at the Epsom Derby or the M25 or supporting our colleagues over the border in other forces, but also in respect of more modern threats that we might face, in respect, for example, of a pandemic or a cyber attack. And that's why in Surrey Police we are paying very careful attention to how it is that we need to prepare ourselves to be able to maintain the very best service, whatever crisis we might be in. And finally, we need to acknowledge that there are many things which can affect our health, whether we're in policing or not. Deprivation of sleep, lack of exercise, poor diet, and so on. The risk of all of those can be exacerbated by a life in policing, which is tough. And I need to ensure that my officers and staff who work all hours of the day and night, who rush to things which most people would run from, who see things every day which most people don't see in a lifetime, are fit, healthy, well rested, in order that we maintain the best possible crime fighting workforce to protect the people who rely on us to protect them. So that summarises as quickly as I can our plan. underneath that sit many specific objectives and measures and tactics which we will be introducing over the coming weeks, months and years. But with that, I'll move on to Gemma for her input about Surrey Heath in particular.
Thank you. So down at Surrey Heath, the specialist neighbourhood team there is a combination of sergeants, police constables, police community support officers who all operate alongside the neighbourhood policing team, which is basically your response team, youth engagement officers, antisocial behaviour officers, a licensing team, tactical advisors for antisocial behaviour, as well as a team of volunteers and specials and cadets. And there's also a whole raft of specialist investigation teams. So we all operate together for policing in Surrey Heath. So our continuing focus is to proactively tackle long-term problems which affect the most vulnerable people in our community and present the greatest harm. We gather our information through Meet the Beat surgeries, through existing relationships that we have within the community, through reporting online or through the 101 system, and also through social media. And we analyse data to try and get to the root cause of the problem, and that helps to inform us how best to use our resources. We try to involve our community and partner agencies as much as possible in our problem solving, and we look for proven methods, whether that be internally or externally into other organisations, and also look for innovative new ways to solve problems. Our focus continuing into 2024 really that I set for my team is visibility in the community. What do I mean by this? Well, focused, considered, formal and informal engagement with the community. It means being out there physically, online and in publications which our audience actually engage with. We want to engage on national issues but tailored to a local approach. And we're continuously working to build relationships with harder to reach communities in Surrey Heath and trying to build trust with them. We plan to be visible to you through our action, so holding partners to account, taking a proactive approach, and ultimately arresting and charging those responsible and telling you that we have done it. On the slide you can see just some examples of the work that we've been doing in the last couple of months over in Surrey Heath. That concludes my part of the presentation, so I think I'll hand back now to Lisa for any questions.
Thank you very much. And thank you again to everyone for joining us. Whether you're joining us on YouTube or you're on Facebook on our Meet the Beat page, please do pop your question into the comments box and we will try to answer as many of them as we can. Any that we can't get to, or if we don't have full answers, we will get in touch with you to make sure that we have. Right, the first question is from Anita. She would like to know, I'll probably go to you, Chief Constable, for this one to start with. This is actually a really good opportunity to explain the wider place, I think, that policing plays within the criminal justice system. So Anita asks, what does Surrey Police do about suspected paedophiles who are arrested and then bailed or released under investigation before they go to court? And why does it take so long for these people to come to court? One offence I know of was reported in late December, but the trial isn't until March 2025. So there's a lot in that beyond policing.
It's a very important question. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to answer it. So the approach which Surrey Police takes to tackling sex offending and paedophilia operates across a range of different disciplines and functions. So first of all, as you would expect, we have a dedicated team of extremely brave and committed and resilient officers and police staff whose responsibility it is to work with private industry to identify people who might have been abusing children or sharing images online, tracking them down, making arrests, linking them to the evidence which implicates them of those offences, working in partnership with social services and other agencies to ensure that any children with whom they might have come into contact are identified and protected, and ultimately then bringing them to justice. That in respect of that type of offence, or indeed an allegation of a sexual offence which might have taken place in the home or in a stranger setting, then has to be put to the Crown Prosecution Service. And we work very closely with partners in the Crown Prosecution Service at an early stage of the investigation to ensure that all reasonable lines of inquiry are being followed and the sorts of issues which are likely to come out at trial are being addressed in the investigation in order to ensure that that investigation is impartial and fair. At the point when the Crown Prosecution Service decide that there's such a sufficiency of evidence for the person to be charged and it's in the public interest to do so, which in this type of crime it almost invariably is, the case then goes into the court system. And a decision has to be made in the first instance by the custody sergeant and then by the court as to whether the defendant, if charged, should be granted bail. There is a presumption in favour of bail, and if the prosecuting authorities want to argue that that person should be remanded into custody, they need to make that argument with reference to certain points, such as the integrity of the investigation, the risk which might be posed to victims and witnesses, the risk that someone might not appear at court, and so on. Those are the factors which need to be considered in respect of whether or not someone gets bail. If they do get bail, whether whilst under police investigation or whilst awaiting trial, then there are measures in place which would enable a degree of control of that person in respect, for example, of where they have to live, where they have to report, who they can't have contact with, and so on. And one would expect that to be very carefully policed by officers locally. Then we run into the difficulty which the criminal justice system is encountering at the moment, and to which your question alludes, of the very substantial backlog which exists in bringing cases to trial. And that's why, as I mentioned, outstanding victim and witness care is so important. And we have our victim and witness care unit in Surrey Police, where police staff work absolutely tirelessly to ensure that victims feel supported and stay with the case right up until the point of trial. I agree completely with the premise of your question. At the moment, we are waiting far longer for trial than we would wish to be the case. Beyond trial and conviction, we then have teams of officers who, when someone has served their sentence and is released, ensure that sexual and violent offenders who have registration requirements are managed extremely carefully in order to minimise as far as possible the risk that is posed. So it's a combination of exemplary victim and witness care, very thorough investigation, close working with the CPS, and overall working with the court system to try and bring cases as swiftly to justice as we can, accepting that at the moment things are delayed in a way which none of us would wish.
Thank you very much. We've got a resident on Facebook. This may be a good question for the Borough Commander. Could you give more information about drug dealing in the Bagshot community following the overdose death on New Year's Eve?
Yeah, of course. So obviously what happened on New Year's Eve was very sad, and for any friends or relatives of that person, our respects and sympathies are with you. We are doing a lot of work in Bagshot and the surrounding area in relation to drug use and drug dealing. In terms of offenders, we have recently issued a community protection warning notice to one offender who, as far as we're aware, hasn't been back into the area since then, and we're working with Hampshire's Intel unit on that as well to make sure that that's the case. We also saw the arrest following a proactive stop of a vehicle of another offender who was in possession of Class A drugs. They've been remanded and remain in custody at the moment until their next appearance at court. In terms of the vulnerable people that sit around the drug dealers, so the drug users, once they're identified, we visit them. We risk assess them and give them a grading. We use a red, amber, a green system. And then that helps to inform us on how often we as the police need to visit them and check on them. Those that are graded as red, for example, we look at measures such as partial closures, so partially closing their property so that they're the only people and along with support workers that can access their property. We put those closures in place and then we visit them regularly, and when we find people there, which we have done, there's a property in Bagshot at the moment with a partial closure, we can arrest the suspect, and like I say, that has happened recently in the last month or so at a property in Bagshot. We also refer people to a multi-agency meeting, which is called the Community Harm and Risk Management Meeting. We sit at that meeting with partner agencies, so Accent Housing and the Community Safety Partnership from the Council, iAccess and Catalyst are charities that also sit on that meeting, along with the Hope Hub. We work together to solve the problem for the long term, so we look at the root cause of the drug use for that person and try to put interventions in place with those partner agencies, so that ultimately if we manage to take out the offenders, we can then prevent the problem from happening again by moving the victim away from drug use for the long term. We also tackle the problem, and we have done, by using the road network. So if we identify vehicles that these people are using, we will look to stop them as much as possible. We can drug swipe drivers now, so much like drink driving, we can test for cannabis and cocaine, and that's a tactic that we've been using. And we've also in the last 6 months done warrants in the Bagshot Green area pertaining to drugs as well. So we're trying to do as much as we can in that area. We know it's a problem and we are proactively working on it. We do need the community's help when it comes to partial closures and full closures of properties. So if ultimately someone is going to be made homeless by a full closure, we do need the backing of the community to provide statements to us to help with that. Those statements can be completely anonymised. So if you do have any information that will help us, then please let us know through social media, 101, speaking to an officer on patrol. Let us know the information, and we can use it to help us down the line.
Great, thank you very much. I've got a question. It's more of a comment from Louise, but it might be an opportunity for you, Chief Constable, to comment a little bit on our recruitment and why it works the way it does. So Louise says she's got a comment on efficiency. Her daughter has been accepted to join Surrey Police. Congratulations, that's fantastic. And should have joined with the January intake that you mentioned earlier. Because her graduation ceremony is on Wednesday, she was not allowed to take the time off, and so therefore she won't be joining until May. 2 issues. Not everyone can afford to hang around 4 months for a job, and there should be limited exceptions to the no time off rule. These processes seem to create unnecessary barriers to your recruitment needs. Do you want to talk about why it's important that recruits are available to attend all of the classes?
Thank you very much, Louise. That's a good question, and you know, I'm bound to compare, I suppose, the wait times for potential recruits now to how it was when I joined, when one tended to have to wait for a couple of years, in fact, but it was a very different employment market then. And you're right to imply, of course, that it's a very competitive and demanding employment market, particularly in Surrey, particularly in respect of police staff, even more than police officers actually. And therefore it's absolutely vital that we operate in as competitive a way as possible, because the last thing we want to do is lose a very capable candidate who could have been an outstanding officer and instead goes elsewhere. That said, in respect of police training and the first couple of weeks in particular, it's very important to me that new officers are available to attend each one of those sessions, which could range from really important inputs on crucial areas of the law, ethics, service in respect of vulnerable victims, or many other things that it's absolutely imperative they attend, are trained in, and capable of being assessed in. That really is absolutely vital. And I think if one thinks back from the service that we provide to the public would rightly expect every last officer who was serving them in their moment of need to have been in attendance at every crucial bit of training and in receipt of that training and tested in their ability to deliver. So we take very seriously the content of our curriculum. We try to ensure that officers are trained as well and as quickly as possible, and therefore the programme is set very efficiently, and so that there's absolutely no waste in the system. So I agree completely that we need to get people through as quickly as we possibly can, but would defend robustly the importance of attending that training. One of the things, of course, that we've done in the last year to ensure that our recruitment is as open as possible is to make it possible to join the police without having or committing to obtain a degree. It was, for a relatively short period of time, necessary for new recruits either to have a degree or to commit to getting one alongside their police training. We took notice of feedback from not only officers themselves but also prospective applicants, and realised that that excluded a great number of very capable people, perhaps a little later in life, with families or joining from other professions such as the military, who were desperately anxious to serve as officers and who would have been outstanding, but who could not reasonably have made those academic commitments as well. So there's lots that we've done in order to open ourselves up to the broadest possible range of applicants. But I think it is right that we are strict on attendance, particularly in those crucial early weeks.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Sorry, Heath Neighbourhood Watch have asked a question that I think is for me, which is how much, I think should be notice, will you take of the results of the survey into account when making your final decision on the council tax rise? So that's a really good question, and it helps me to clarify. So the survey is exactly that. It's a survey rather than, for example, a referendum or a vote. I take it very seriously and absolutely take it into account. Ultimately, though, I am held accountable by the Surrey public at the election time. The next election is happening on May the 2nd, but I have to take the decision ultimately and be responsible for the decision, and make sure that the Chief Constable and all officers have the resources available to them. So I will take it into account, absolutely. It's really, really important to me that people have their say on what it is and on what issues they want to focus on. But ultimately, I am responsible for taking that decision as to how much council tax is. But it's a really, really important part of it, people having their say, and so I can understand. So it's very much taken into account. Right, we've had contact from a resident around witness care. I wonder if you could explain a little bit more about if somebody is a witness to a crime, and this you may both want to chip in here. If somebody has been a witness to a crime, what follow-up can they expect from police officers once they've reported a crime or a suspected incident?
Shall I take it in the first instance? So this is a really good opportunity to state the importance of the police following reasonable lines of inquiry. And I don't pretend that the police always get this right or that Surrey police are always getting this right. But it is my commitment that where someone reports a crime, where there are good, reasonable lines of inquiry for us to follow up, whether that's burglary, shoplifting, some sort of assault, sexual offence, open space drug dealing, one could go on, and there are reasonable lines of inquiry which could lead to the gathering of evidence or the identification of an offender, we should be following those. Now, obviously, we have to prioritise crime according to their seriousness and according to the risk posed, but that's something the government is rightly encouraging policing to do, and I'm determined that we will do that. Someone having been a victim of crime or a witness to crime, and often those are the same thing, can then realistically expect to receive updates on how it is that case is progressing. We rely on the information from the public in order to protect the public. Without intelligence and information from the public, we can't operate in their best interest. So it's absolutely right that when someone gives us that information, that we not only act on it, but also provide updates to the public in respect of how the case is going or to the particular person. And then we get a virtuous cycle, in my view, of reporting, engagement, satisfaction, and hopefully then someone saying, look, I got a really good response from the police. If you see something, it's worth reporting it. One of the things which most concerns me is when I go out and about and people say, well, we don't report it because you won't do anything about it. And we heard that, for example, in respect of crimes such as shoplifting. Well, it's very important to me that people do report it and that we both do act on lines of inquiry and are held to account for doing so, because without those reports, we don't have the evidence that we need to act on. So in summary, you should expect the lines of inquiry to be followed up, and you should expect updates in respect of how they've been followed up and how the case has progressed to a level that would encourage you to report that crime again were it to happen.
I wonder if one of the issues, and you just mentioned it there, that's coming up when I speak to people in Surrey Heath, whether it's councillors or residents, is actually around shoplifting, and you've talked a little bit about it. I wonder if you could give us, both of you actually, both very, very locally, but also within your plan, a bit more detail, Chief Constable, around what the force is doing around shoplifting, which we've seen a rise in nationally in recent months. Yes,
and it was both interesting and concerning for me in visiting the 11 boroughs to hear at almost every one reports from the public where they had witnessed thieves operating in local shops alongside people who are, rightly paying for their goods with their own hard-earned money. And we know that during the pandemic, for example, whilst we relied very much on the health service and the emergency services, we also very much relied on people who are going out and working all hours in local stores and in our supermarkets to ensure that the country kept going. And it's absolutely vital that the police plays its part in protecting that critical infrastructure which ensures that we have all the goods and services that we need. Shoplifting is a very straightforward crime to investigate. There is often CCTV, there are often witnesses. Sometimes I hear shoplifting referred to as though it's a minor crime. It is not. Someone has gone out with a very specific intent to steal. Perhaps it is driven by need. Perhaps it is driven by some sort of addiction. Maybe the person is working as part of an organised crime group. It's not for us as police officers in the first instance to second guess what the motive might be, still less to condone it. We have to investigate the crime and then arrive at the best disposal for that case, whether it's a charge or some other sort of disposal option, depending on the seriousness of the crime or the status of the offender. But it's very important to me that we prioritise that. I understand why in recent years the police have pulled away somewhat from crimes such as shoplifting. That's simply because we've been rightly focusing on crimes such as domestic abuse and the exploitation of the vulnerable, which perhaps we hadn't focused on in the way that we might have done in the past. But that in no way diminishes the need to deal with the crimes such as shoplifting, open space drug dealing, crimes within antisocial behaviour, which, if not tackled, really affect public confidence in policing. And back to the previous question, then disincline people from reporting cases to the police. I've committed to having at least 6 high-profile crime-fighting operations every year in Surrey, and the first of those was in December, focusing on shoplifting in particular, where we saw a great number of arrests and charges in the day when we ran that operation, along with lots of prevention activity going hand in hand with local shops. Now, it might be that, Gemma, you can give some examples about Surrey Heath in particular, but hopefully that reassures people about my determination to tackle that crime.
Yeah, so there was a picture on my slideshow actually of that specific operation. So that ran between the 15th and 17th of December. In Surrey Heath, we looked at where our shoplifting hotspots were. There was a number in the town centre of Camberley and some shops outside of the town centre. So on the Saturday, we specifically focused on the town. We had plainclothes officers around, but also uniformed officers for that reassurance and presence in the town centre. And then on the Sunday we operated in the out of town locations. The only thing I will say about that is these are our hotspots that we know about because of crime recording and reporting, which we know is a problem, as you've just said, that underreporting is a problem. So we're working with the BID in Camberley to try and up the willingness of people to report theft, because for various reasons that has slowed, and we have seen people start to increase, the reports of theft are increasing from retail shops. More long-term work that we're doing is one of our Designing Out crime officers has been assisting us with visits to those hotspot locations or locations that we identify as wanting support in terms of crime prevention. So he'll go out and assist them in advising them around crime prevention, and we're looking at introducing a system called DISC in Camberley at the moment, which is already being used to really good effect in Guildford and also in Basingstoke, just locally, that I'm aware of. And so that's a tool that shops can use to report crime to us directly, but also share that information with other shops. And it also works alongside Pubwatch. So it's a really useful tool, and that will help us in the long term. And you've already mentioned that obviously on that operation we went out and visited our top nominals, as we call them, our top offenders for shoplifting locally, and looked at actioning arrests that we had outstanding for shoplifting offences. The only other point I had on the original question, which I've almost forgotten now, I think, but I've written it down, so I'll say it, is obviously we have some legislated duties under the Victim Code to keep victims informed and the way we do it. So you can always expect, and I might get my timescales wrong now, but I believe it's the first contact within 48 hours. And then subsequent contact from the officer investigating the case. They have to provide you with certain written bits of information, such as your crime reference number, their name and their contact details. And then they're supposed to agree a contact contract with the victim. So they agree whether you, for example, would prefer to be contacted by email, by phone, and the frequency of that contact. And it has to be a minimum of 28 days and normally prime event, so if there's a development in the investigation. And that is a legislative duty, and we're actually quite hot internally on making sure that's done and feeding back to officers and ultimately looking at performance plans if it's not done. Yeah,
that's really helpful actually, and the Victims Code is something that you can find out more about. It's a national code, applies nationally. As Police and Crime Commissioners, we have a duty to adhere to it. At the moment, I should say, it does not apply, unfortunately, to antisocial behaviour and victims and witnesses in terms of antisocial behaviour, but that is something that we're working on nationally as well. But if you want to find out more information on the Victims Code, then you can do so online. Right, we've only got a few minutes left. I've got a couple of final questions. Thank you for everybody who has joined us, whether on Facebook or on YouTube. Thank you for all the questions that you've put in. Thank you also in particular to Suzanne, who you can see there has been signing away throughout this entire and will be with us for each of the meetings. So thank you very much to her as well. I've got a couple more questions which we'll try and get through. At the last Surrey Heath event in October, the Chief Constable was asked about crime solved figures, which appear to show that Surrey is performing at one of the lowest rates in the country. Where does Surrey rank now? That's a wider question, isn't it? There's quite a lot there.
It's a very important question. We discussed burglary in particular last time. We were talking about charge rates and we were talking about crime solved more generally. So there's two ways of looking at solved crime. There's those cases which result in a charge, which is where someone is put into the court system. And Surrey is still, I'm afraid, at the bottom of UK police forces in that respect. And if one looks more specifically at other types of solved crime, such as, for example, burglary, sexual offences, or those crimes where someone isn't charged but might receive some other sort of disposal, then the picture is rather more favourable. That said, I am relying in making that assessment on the most recent figures which are publicly available, and I am quietly confident that over the coming year, when each quarter figures are released which compare Surrey's performance to other forces, then it will show two things. Firstly, an increase on our own performance when compared against ourselves, which is the most important thing. We need to be getting better with ourselves at the comparison, but I expect also for us to be rising up the rankings when compared to other forces as well. As you would expect, my senior colleagues have been visiting the best performing forces in the country to find out what it is that they do to ensure that a better quality of service is given to victims and witnesses in those areas. But I and my team were already pretty certain as to the measures we need to put in place to ensure that Surrey gets better in this respect. We've seen, for example, in relation to shoplifting, our rate of arrest and charge increased very dramatically. We've seen the same in relation to domestic abuse and other crime types. And as I'm watching the statistics every day, I don't want to be premature in advancing any huge progress, but I am very confident that by the time I'm reporting to Surrey residents this time next year, we will see by quite some degree an increase in the number of offenders who've been brought to justice.
Excellent, thank you very much. One final question then, and then and a few words perhaps on prevention. So the final question is, how do we deal with fraud? It's one of the biggest crimes across the country, which we know, particularly online. Is it a particular problem in Surrey, first of all? And then the second part of that is, what can people do to protect themselves? And I wonder if you could say a few words, given that we are still in the winter months and we know that crimes like burglary go up. If you could talk a little bit about protection and prevention.
Yes. Longer established crimes such as burglary are devastating when they happen to victims and families, but it is certainly capable to reduce your risk of being a victim of burglary. That's not to say for a moment that we in any sense hold people responsible who are victims of crime. It's very much the fault of the criminal who commits it, not the victim themselves. But whilst rates of burglary are mercifully lower than they were, there's still an awful lot that can be done, whether in respect of basic home security measures or indeed being a membership of vital schemes such as Neighbourhood Watch, or taking advantage of the provisions in relation to doorbell footage and so on, which are now more available than once was the case, and actually is one of the things which is driving down burglary in particular. But the question was about fraud, and I'm glad that's been posed in the context of prevention in particular, because we know that fraud is highly preventable. There was data out some years ago from the National Crime Agency, I think, which estimated that fraud and cybercrime was as much as 80% preventable with good crime prevention advice, good security, and proper protection of victims who are repeatedly targeted. So Surrey, as other police forces do, work in partnership with Action Fraud to identify frauds where there are lines of inquiry which we need to pursue. We make sure that we are identifying people who are repeat victims of fraud, and also people who might, for example, be on lists who offenders are targeting repeatedly because they're vulnerable. Ensure that through our neighbourhood policing teams they're given extra support and crime prevention advice. And we also carry out particular financial investigations of people where we think that the full use of our financial investigation powers might enable us to target fraudsters by another means rather than investigating their case reactively. We also operate as part of a cooperation with the South East region, where we look at frauds which affect people cross-border and make sure that we're using our specialist investigators to target those. Because it was interesting that the question said, to what extent is this a crime which is a problem in Surrey? Of course, the very nature of fraud means it often operates in a borderless way. It might be that Gemma is able to say something about signature in particular. Do you want to finish off with that if you're able to?
So you alluded to, obviously, my team do visit vulnerable victims of fraud. When they get referred to us, we go out, we visit them and conduct a risk assessment. Those at the higher end of the risk assessment, there's now a victim witness care caseworker for fraud who we met recently, actually. Fantastic. They work with that person. It's limitless in terms of time, so they work with them for as long as needs be to try and prevent them from becoming a victim of fraud for a second time, which allows my team to then obviously get back out on the street. We can install devices called TrueCall. You can also have them installed through trading standards, but they fit to a home phone, so we actually don't do many of them anymore because obviously a lot of it is done through mobile phones, but the older generation tend to have home phones still. We can fit the device, which sort of helps to filter out any calls that shouldn't be coming in, and that's something that we can do. You just need to ask us for that. And we also have sort of specialists in cybercrime. So I know that Surrey Heath Neighbourhood Watch are due to have a presentation from our cybercrime specialists in, I can't remember if it was March or June, but he's available to any community groups to go out and do presentations. Actually is looking desperately for more groups that he can tap into and share some information. And then locally, my team, as part of the strategy, February to April, our specific focuses for crime prevention are actually cybercrime, fraud and drugs. So two of the issues or three of the issues that have come up tonight. So those are the areas in that specific period where we're focusing on crime prevention. So you will hopefully see more of that in the coming months.
Brilliant. Thank you very much to both Tim de Meyer and to Gemma Taylor for joining us, and to all of you in Surrey Heath, whether you've joined us on Facebook or on YouTube, and indeed those who have joined twice and were able to join us as well in person. We really appreciate it. Just as a reminder, if you do get an opportunity, please do head to the website where you can fill in the council tax survey. We'd really appreciate your views on that. You can get in touch with Surrey Police or with my office on the details on our websites as well. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your evening.